Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Photo Notes. My name is Tony Colangelo, and as per usual, I'm here with my good friend, Wayne Capilli.
Morning.
Hey, Wayne, how are you?
I'm doing really well.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. This is our first session, our first Photo Notes video after the great PFRE conference in Vegas. And boy, we had a great time doing our photo critique on stage and presenting a number of photos. And I know that you and I had a great time even preparing for that session.
Yeah, and when we were going through the pictures, we had 90 pictures that we were going through. One of the things that we were noticing was shallow angles.
Yeah. So today, and it was really interesting because I think we made reference to lens angle, camera angle in one photo. But in chatting with you after our session, I thought, this would be a great topic for photo notes because shallow angles in and of themselves can be okay, but when you combine them with another factor, they could really negatively impact our images for real estate or for any other interior client, architect, interior designer. And today, I think it would be great to talk about that. So what I'd like to do now is to share my screen and just describe what I mean. So Wayne, here we have an overhead view of a bedroom. And if you think about the panning element on our tripod, there's that 360-degree circle that our panning element takes. And when we break up that circle in degrees, from 0 to 360, if we cut it in half, obviously 0 to 180, and if we're going to do a 1 point of this bedroom, then the length of our lens has to be at 90 degrees to do a really good 1 point. Now, it's interesting.
Would it be the length of the lens or the angle of the lens?
Well, to me, that's the way I see it. The length of the lens has to be on that 90-degree axis.
Okay.
So it's interesting because, we've been talking about oblique angles, and our good friend Peter Lyons reminded us that an oblique angle is really any angle within the 180 degrees other than 90. So from 0 to 89.9 and 90.1 to 180. So really, when we think about real estate photography, probably the most common angle is kind of like the sharp angle, 35 to 45 degrees, the standard shoot corner to corner, right? Right. However, we can also take a shallow oblique angle. Yes, there are sharp oblique angles when we shoot corner to corner, but we could also shoot shallow, all right?
Okay.
And shooting shallow in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. And I want to show this photo as an example of that. So here we see a very shallow camera angle. This was shot for an interior design client of mine who wanted to maximize the space in this kitchen. And she designed this really funky sort of combination usage desk and drawer system there. She really liked it and she wanted this detail shot. So given the configuration of the kitchen, I chose to do or set up my camera to shoot on this very narrow, very shallow angle. However, and here's the key, I stood back and zoomed in.
Right.
All right. And so this was shot at 47 millimeters. And as you can see, the planes of the various surfaces, let me get my my paintbrush. The planes of this surface and that surface look realistic, as if you and I were standing in this room. All right. If we take a look at this photo, we see essentially the same shallow camera angle, but The other factor that is involved in this photo that wasn't involved in the previous photo was how wide we're shooting, right? And as you can see, when you combine a shallow camera angle with shooting ultra effing wide, as Scott Hargis likes to say, boy, are you pulling a whole bunch of danger and a whole bunch of hurt into the photograph, right?
Yeah, and also when we're talking ultra wide, let's talk about three walls. So when you're talking ultra wide angle and three walls, not only is there distortion off to the sides, the wall behind the bed is kind of making that kind of a trapezoidal kind of effect. So
yeah, it's here, let me get a different color. And yes, I know exactly what you mean. So you're talking about from there to about there, right? This wall right here.
Right.
The thing that I wanted to show is look at the corners.
Yeah.
Look how this doesn't look like a square room. It looks like a trapezoid. It's almost like a shallow triangle. I mean, the distortion is huge here. And we can visualize that if we were to take the dimensions of this huge king size footboard, whatever you call it, we could easily fit that, right in there. I mean, that's roughly the same thing. So the wide angle, taking a shallow angle into the scene and shooting extra wide, ultra wide, can get us into a bunch of trouble in our work.
Yeah, and the last thing is for the Funhouse Distortion, just take a look at the lampshades. The lampshade on the left is much bigger than the lampshade on the right. So, as far as scale wise, this really is a good size room, and this is really a good size bed. But because of the wide angle distortion, this looks like a huge room with a tiny bed in it.
Yeah, it looks like a tiny bed. And actually, this chair in the bottom right corner, because with ultra wide angle, the distortion that we get when we're relatively close to our subjects and shooting ultra wide, that chair almost looks as wide as that king size bed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely crazy. So the last thing that I wanted to talk about as it relates to shallow angles, Wayne, I want to talk about this photo right here. Okay. Now, if we look, actually, this is straight out of camera. Nothing's been done to it. And I want to highlight something here. So typically we see this as a 1 point, and the dominant characteristic of a 1 point is when all the length lines, the lines that take you from here to there, converge at 1 point, okay? But here, what we see, if we get rid of those length lines, the other dominant characteristic in a good 1 point is that the vertical lines have to be vertical. And as you can see, they are right there. But if we zoom in and look at the top of the door frame, the other consideration in a 1 point is that our horizontals have to also be straight and parallel, just like our verticals. And as we can see here, they simply are not. Our horizontals are not straight.
Okay, so from the zoomed out thing, did you see that small discrepancy in the 1 point?
This was actually the last photo of a second day of a 2-day photo shoot, and I was exhausted. I hadn't had lunch, and normally I would pick up on these things, but on this particular day I didn't, I thought this would make a good example of, if you are going to be shooting so shallow that you're really only 1 or 2 degrees off of a 1 point, then double check, just take 30 seconds to double check, make sure your verticals are straight, make sure your horizontals are straight. And then you have your leading lines going in, and let's get rid of those guidelines. That makes for a solid 1 point. So look at the difference between the actual 1 point and are extremely shallow angle. Now,
even just that little shift, you notice.
it's noticeable. And, if you're shooting for real estate, the agent might not pick up on it. And look, is it a terrible photo as a 2-point? No, it's not. I think it's an actually attractive photo. But if you're shooting for a designer, if you're shooting for an architect, my goodness, an architect can spot a 1-degree difference at 100 yards. If you're going to be shooting for that clientele and you're this close to a 1-point anyway, well, holy jumping, just make it a 1-point.
Also, what I wanted to point out with where your camera position is I like the way that your 1-point where your camera is pointed out the door as opposed to moving the camera. So we're taking pictures of the door jamb, camera position. You're leading me out the door simply by putting your camera and pointing it out where you want me to go.
Exactly. So I moved my camera position to a spot where my lens was pointed out here. Now, this was one of my ambient frames. I also have a frame for the view. Right out there is the Pacific Ocean. So that's what I wanted to, it's a great point that you made, rather than being centered on the door frame.
Right. Because the subject is the Pacific Ocean, not the door frame.
The subject really is I want the view to get taken out that door, which is why I opened the door. And as you can see, it was a windy day that day, and there's my shoe propping the door open because I wanted to lead the viewer out that door. So anyway, the bottom line point that I wanted to make is shallow angles can be very, very useful, but don't use them ultra wide when your subject matter is very, very close to the camera, because you're just going to accentuate that wide angle distortion.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay.
So
any other thoughts, Wayne?
Nope, I think you covered it. And thank you very much.
Great. On that note, thank you for joining us. We hope that you'll continue to join us. And not only that, please remember that if you have a topic that you'd like us to cover, please send an email to myself or Wayne. Our contact information will be posted at the end of the video. And as always, if you have a photo that you'd like us to critique, please submit it, send us an email, and we'll be happy to review it in a future episode. So that's it, bud.
Okay, thank you very much. And follow us on Instagram and on this channel.
Absolutely. Thank you, everyone. Hope you'll join us again soon.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye now.